In the forgotten corners of World War II's battlefields, scattered from the relentlessly humid jungles of the Pacific to the frozen, silent forests of Europe, a strange and silent testament to a forbidden science remains. We find wooden artifacts, objects forged in the desperate, brutal calculus of a global conflict, that simply refuse to die. Bridge timbers that once groaned under the immense crushing weight of Sherman and Panzer tanks are, more than 80 years later, still structurally sound, defying the rot and decay that consumes all things. Ammunition crates, pulled from the suffocating mud and acidic decay of long-abandoned trenches, have been unearthed with their contents perfectly preserved, the wood as solid as the day it was milled. The survival of this wood was no accident. It was a strategic necessity born from the harshest lessons of war. In an age of total war, where entire nations threw their full industrial and human might into the fray, the failure of something as simple and ubiquitous as wood was a critical vulnerability that commanders and planners could not afford to overlook. A single rotted timber in a hastily constructed bridge could collapse under a supply convoy, severing a vital artery to the front and costing thousands of lives. A decayed ammunition crate meant that the rounds inside would be corroded and useless, leaving soldiers defenseless and ensuring a battle was lost before the first shot was even fired. In this environment, there was absolutely no room for error, no tolerance for the slow, insidious work of nature. This was a war fought not just with steel and gunpowder, but with secrets, deception, and hidden techniques, powerful enough to bend the laws of biology and change the course of history. So, what did they know then that we have since forgotten? What was the secret science that turned ordinary perishable lumber into a nearly immortal weapon of war? Number 1, the wartime demand for superior lumber. The Second World War was a conflict of unprecedented scale, a global engine of consumption whose logistical appetite was nothing short of voracious. While our collective memory rightly focuses on the crucial roles of steel for ships and tanks, rubber for tires and treads, and oil for fuel, an unseen and often overlooked vulnerability threatened the entire Allied war effort. Its profound reliance on wood. Wood was the unsung, unassuming hero of the war, the fundamental building block for nearly every aspect of military operations, from the rear echelons to the front lines. The United States and its allies needed it for everything, in quantities that staggered the imagination. They needed barracks to house millions of soldiers, creating sprawling cities of timber seemingly overnight. And they needed vast, echoing warehouses to store a global war's worth of supplies, from uniforms to K-rations. And they needed the millions upon millions of sturdy crates required to ship every rifle, every artillery shell, every aircraft engine, and every medical kit across treacherous, submarine-infested oceans to every corner of the planet. Beyond the immense world of logistics, wood was the primary material for mission-critical infrastructure that had to be built under fire and under pressure. Engineers in the fields of Europe built and rebuilt countless bridges with heavy timbers, their work essential for the advance of armies. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, the legendary Seabees constructed entire docks, piers, and airfields from wood, literally carving civilization out of the jungle to project military power. Wood was even integrated directly into the machinery of war itself, forming the sleek, powerful hulls of patrol boats like the famous PT boats, the bodies and structural components of countless trucks, and even key parts of celebrated aircraft like the de Havilland Mosquito, the wooden wonder. This sudden, explosive spike in demand pushed the global timber industry to its absolute limit, forcing it to abandon any pretense of conservation in favor of maximum, immediate output. The need was not merely for staggering quantity, but for uncompromising quality and durability. A single point of failure was simply unacceptable. Number 2, the foundational advantage of old-growth heartwood. Before a single drop of chemical preservative was ever deployed, the wood of the World War II era possessed a secret weapon, a foundational strength drawn from the very heart of ancient, untouched forests. Much of the timber requisitioned for the war effort, especially for the most critical applications, was harvested from old-growth stands, towering cathedrals of trees that had grown slowly, patiently, and deliberately for centuries. This process created a material that was fundamentally superior in almost every way to the fast-grown lumber common today. The key to its incredible power lay in the stark distinction between a tree's sapwood and its heartwood. Sapwood, which constitutes the living outer layers of a tree, is the system responsible for transporting water and nutrients. It is therefore soft, porous, full of moisture, and highly susceptible to the fungal, rot, and insect attacks that all wood must face. Heartwood, by contrast, is the dense, non-living core that provides the tree's structural strength and stability, its central pillar. Over the course of centuries, as the tree matures, this core becomes infused with a potent cocktail of natural defensive chemicals known as extractives. These compounds, complex tannins, aromatic oils, and sticky resins, are the tree's own immune system, making the heartwood incredibly resistant to the very fungi and insects that would otherwise devour it. Old-growth timber, because of its incredibly slow growth rate dictated by competition for light in a dense forest, has extremely tight growth rings. This physical property makes the wood far denser, heavier, and tougher in a way that is almost impossible to find in modern plantation-grown trees. These ancient giants yielded a far higher proportion of this naturally durable, extractive-rich heartwood compared to their younger, faster-growing counterparts. For the most critical applications where failure meant disaster, such as the main structural timbers of a bridge or the hull of a patrol boat, military specifications were uncompromising. They often demanded lumber where all the softer, vulnerable sapwood was completely excluded, relying entirely on the supreme innate rot-resistant properties of pure heartwood. In essence, they were building with the very strongest part of the tree, a material that had already spent hundreds of years fortifying itself against the very forces of nature the military now needed to defeat. Number 3, the myth of borax paint and its real wartime role. Amid the enduring legends of indestructible World War II wood, a persistent and compelling myth has taken root. A simple story of a forgotten paint additive that supposedly made ordinary lumber invincible. The legend, passed down through anecdotes and workshop lore, centers on borax, a common, relatively safe mineral. The tale suggests that soldiers, laborers, and craftsmen would simply stir this white powder into their standard issue paint, creating a miracle coating that would not only color the wood, but soak deep into its fibers, making it magically immune to rot and decay. It's an incredibly compelling story, primarily because it points to a lost piece of simple, accessible wisdom, a non-toxic, homespun secret that our complex modern world has since forgotten in its pursuit of more complicated solutions. But this story, appealing as it is a convenient fiction, a nostalgic smokescreen that obscures a far more complex, more industrial, and ultimately more dangerous truth about how wood was really protected. While borates were indeed a crucial and widely used chemical during the war, their primary documented use was not as a widespread paintable rot-proofing agent for general construction. The charming tale of borax paint is a classic case of misdirection, where first-hand accounts of durable borax-painted crates were likely misattributing the wood's impressive resilience to the wrong cause, mistaking correlation for causation. The real story of borax is just as critical to the war effort, but it revolves around defeating a different, faster-moving enemy: fire. In an era of devastating incendiary bombs, where a single spark could lead to catastrophic fire risk in munitions factories, on naval ships, and in blacked-out cities, fire retardancy was a matter of strategic survival. Detailed records from the U.S. Forest Products Laboratory, the scientific epicenter of wood research for the war, shows that borax and its cousin, boric acid, were obsessively researched, tested, and deployed for precisely this purpose. The connection between borax and the longevity of World War II era materials is absolutely real, but its primary role has been fundamentally misunderstood by popular myth. Borax was not the secret ingredient against the slow threat of decay. It was a key chemical weapon in the desperate, high-stakes fight against the instantaneous threat of fire. Number 4. The science of fire retardancy with barates. While borax wasn't the mythical secret weapon against rot, its true wartime role was a brilliant and absolutely critical application of applied chemistry, making flammable materials resistant to fire. In a total war, fire was a terrifyingly effective weapon used to level cities and destroy infrastructure. Protecting the Allied war machine's own materials from ignition was, therefore, a strategic necessity of the highest order. Military and civil defense manuals of the era are filled with detailed procedures for treating all manner of flammable items with barat solutions, a testament to how seriously this threat was taken. The primary method was straightforward and scalable, suitable for use in the field and in factories. It involved dissolving a specific mixture of borax and boric acid in hot water, then using this saturated solution to treat everything from canvas tents and vehicle covers to the heavy blackout curtains used by civilians during nighttime air raids. The science behind it was brilliantly simple, yet profoundly effective. When a borat-treated material was exposed to the intense heat of a flame or an incendiary device, the borats would initiate a two-stage defensive reaction. First, the borat crystals, which hold water molecules within their structure, would release this locked-in water as steam. This jet of steam served two purposes. It rapidly cooled the material at the point of contact and, just as importantly, it displaced the oxygen in the immediate area, helping to smother the nascent flame. If the heat continued to rise, the borats would then perform their second trick. They would melt and fuse into a non-flammable, glassy char on the surface of the material. This slick, carbonaceous barrier acted as a powerful insulator, shielding the underlying wood or fabric from the extreme heat and preventing the release of flammable gases required for combustion. The treatment didn't make materials entirely fireproof, a crucial distinction that military manuals were careful to stress, but it made them flame-resistant. An untreated canvas tent could erupt into an inferno from a single stray spark, but a treated one would only char and smolder at the point of contact, preventing the catastrophic spread of the fire. The largest production of fire-retardant treated wood in history happened during World War II, where it was used for massive, high-value structures like dirigible hangars and for essential shoring timbers aboard naval ships, where a fire at sea was a sailor's worst nightmare. For a pilot in a burning cockpit or a factory worker surrounded by flammable materials, those crucial seconds of flame resistance could mean the difference between a minor incident and a lethal disaster. Number 5. Pressure treatment. The true secret, the core technology behind the most legendarily durable wood of World War II, was not a simple paint or a brush-on coating, but a brutal, powerful, and highly effective industrial process. Pressure treatment. This technology was not a craft, but a science. The essential delivery system for the powerful chemical weapons that gave wood its seemingly supernatural resistance to rot, fungus, and insects. The industry standard was the Bethel full cell process, a heavy industrial operation meticulously designed to force toxic chemicals into the very cellular structure of lumber, poisoning it against biological attack from the inside out. The process itself was a violent ritual of chemistry and physics. Massive quantities of wood, such as thick railroad ties, structural bridge timbers, or utility poles, were loaded onto trams and rolled into a huge, sealed steel cylinder, a pressure vessel that could be over 100 feet long. The heavy steel door was bolted shut, and the first stage began. A powerful vacuum pump roared to life, sucking nearly all the air and residual moisture out of the wood's countless microscopic cells, creating an empty, thirsty void ready to be filled. Then, with the vacuum held, the entire cylinder was flooded with a heated chemical preservative, which could be oily like creosote or a water-based salt solution, completely submerging the wood in the toxic bath. Finally, the most critical step. Immense hydraulic pressure was applied to the liquid, often reaching up to 200 pounds per square inch, a force equivalent to being hundreds of feet deep in the ocean. This tremendous pressure was maintained for several hours, physically forcing the poisonous preservative deep into the lumber, past the outer layers, and into the core, ensuring it penetrated every possible space. The goal was to leave the wood cells utterly saturated and permanently contaminated with the chemical agent. This was not craftsmanship. This was chemical warfare on a microscopic level, an engineered process designed to make wood completely inedible and inhospitable to the fungi, termites, and marine borers that would otherwise consume it, guaranteeing it would last for decades. Number 6. The heavy-duty workhorse. Of all the chemical weapons deployed to protect wood during this era, the oldest, most widespread, and most important for heavy-duty applications was creosote. If you have ever seen old, blackened railroad ties humming in the summer heat, or smelled the distinct, tar-like aroma rising from weathered telephone poles and pier pilings, you have witnessed the enduring legacy of this substance. Creosote is a thick, oily, brownish-black liquid distilled from coal tar, a byproduct of turning coal into coke for the steel industry. By the 1940s, it had already been the undisputed king of wood preservation for a century, prized for one simple reason: its profound and indiscriminate toxicity to nearly every living organism that attacks wood. Applied using the brutal and efficient Bethel pressure process, hot creosote was forced deep into the wood structure until it was completely saturated with the greasy, powerfully odorous preservative. The oil-based nature of creosote provided a dual benefit. Not only did its chemical composition poison any fungus or insect that tried to eat it, but its oily nature also made the wood inherently water repellent, denying rot-causing fungi the moisture they need to survive. The result was a material that was dark, formidable, impervious to water, and utterly lethal to its biological enemies. During World War II, creosote was the indispensable lifeblood of the military's vast logistical network. It was used for the millions of railroad crossties that carried troops and supplies across continents, for the massive bridge timbers that spanned rivers in the path of advancing armies, and for the countless pilings driven into seabeds to build the docks and piers that unloaded the machinery of war. These were the components that had to withstand constant moisture, direct ground contact, and immense structural stress without fail. Its effectiveness was legendary, but by 1945, the very industries that produced coal tar for creosote were desperately needed for other critical parts of the war effort, like the production of explosives and synthetic materials, leading to severe shortages. This scarcity drove the military and industry to adopt other preservatives for different applications. But for the heaviest, most unforgiving structural jobs, creosote remained the gold standard, a brutally effective material perfectly suited for a brutal time. Number 7. Pentachlorophenol (PCP) and its role. As the war intensified and the demand for preservatives outstripped the supply of traditional chemicals, like creosote, the military and its industrial partners turned to a formidable new weapon from the world of synthetic chemistry, pentachlorophenol, more commonly known as PCP. First developed and patented as a wood preservative in the 1930s, its production and use exploded during the war, quickly becoming a critical part of the growing chemical arsenal against biological decay. Unlike creosote, which is a complex and variable mixture distilled from coal tar, PCP was a specific manufactured organochlorine compound, a product of the modern laboratory. It was typically dissolved in a heavy petroleum oil and, like creosote, forced deep into the wood using the same industrial pressure treatment process. Its incredible power was rooted in its terrifying efficiency as a broad-spectrum biocide. PCP works on a cellular level by uncoupling oxidative phosphorylation. In simpler terms, it effectively short-circuits an organism's cells, preventing them from producing or using ATP, the molecule that stores and transports energy. Without the ability to generate energy, the cells of fungi, insects, and other microbes rapidly die, leading to a swift death for any organism attempting to colonize the treated wood. During the war, its oil-based solution was used to treat millions of utility poles and the crossarms that held vital communication lines. But it was also invaluable for preserving the countless wooden ammunition boxes and shipping pallets needed to transport ordnance and supplies around the globe. Beyond wood, its potent biocidal properties were used to protect other vital organic materials that were highly vulnerable to decay: canvas tents, ropes, and textiles, which would otherwise disintegrate in a matter of weeks in the hot, humid, and fungus-rich environment of the Pacific Theater, were treated with PCP to prevent them from rotting away. This synthetic marvel, born from a chemist's flask, proved its worth as a versatile and lethal protector of critical military assets, ensuring that everything from ammunition boxes to a soldier's tent would survive the harshest and most unforgiving conditions imaginable. Number 8. Chromated copper arsenate, CCA. Alongside the heavy, oily preservatives like creosote and pentachlorophenol, a third, more advanced and sophisticated chemical weapon against wood decay was deployed during the World War II era: chromated copper arsenate, or CCA. Invented and patented in India in 1933 and commercialized in the United States shortly thereafter, CCA represented a new and revolutionary generation of water-based, or salt, preservatives. By the 1940s, it provided a powerful, long-lasting, and crucially non-oily alternative to the traditional treatments. The genius of CCA was its elegant and deadly three-part chemical strike force, with each component assigned a specific lethal role. The copper component is a powerful and well-known fungicide. Its primary mission to stop the growth of the fungi that cause rot and decay. The arsenic is a potent insecticide and general poison. Its job to be lethal to termites, wood-boring beetles, and any other insect that might try to eat the wood. But the third ingredient, chromium, was the true masterstroke of the formula. The chromium acts as a chemical fixative. When the water-based CCA solution is impregnated into the wood, the chromium initiates a complex series of chemical reactions with the wood's own lignin and cellulose structure. This reaction permanently locks the highly toxic copper and arsenic poisons into the wood's fibers at a molecular level, binding them in place. This fixation process was a revolutionary leap forward, making the toxic chemicals incredibly resistant to leaching out of the wood, even after decades of direct exposure to rain, snow, and groundwater. Because it was a water-based treatment and not oil-based, the resulting lumber was clean to the touch, free from the overpowering odor of creosote. And, most importantly, it was paintable. This made it essential for a whole new range of applications, where a clean surface was required, or where personnel might come into frequent direct contact with the wood, from barracks, construction, to fences and decking. The signature pale greenish tint, often seen on older outdoor lumber, is the unmistakable mark of this treatment. CCA was not a simple poison. It was sophisticated industrial chemistry, a multi-pronged chemical attack designed not just to kill, but to permanently integrate itself with the wood, conquering decay, and ensuring the material would last for decades. Today, the legacy of this forgotten era is scattered across the globe. Off the coast of Virginia, 9 concrete ships form a breakwater at Kiptopeke State Park. Another 10 are still afloat, part of a floating breakwater in the Powell River of British Columbia. At Arromanches, the weathered remnants of the Phoenix caissons still stand against the tide. Looking at these decaying giants, it's impossible not to feel a sense of wonder. We live in an era that is, in some ways, mirroring the constraints of the 1940s. We face a growing scarcity of resources and the urgent need for more sustainable infrastructure. It begs the question, did we abandon these principles too soon? Could the lessons of the Mulberry Harbors inform a new generation of modular coastal defenses? Could the material efficiency of the concrete ships offer a path toward more sustainable construction? The systems thinking, the mastery of prefabrication, the ethos of doing more with less, these are not just historical curiosities. They are deeply relevant principles. The engineers of World War II didn't have supercomputers. They had slide rules, basic materials, and an impossible problem to solve. And with that, they built floating harbors, launched fleets of stone ships, and changed the course of history. They proved that the limits of a material are often just the limits of our own imagination. Their work is a powerful reminder that sometimes the most innovative solutions are found in rediscovering the forgotten genius of the past.